In the scorching days, the sun mercilessly scorched the earth, and the sandy winds carried a hot, dusty whirlwind. Despite these hardships, the townsfolk resiliently adapted to the harsh conditions of the Wild West. Drake Ranch was the heart and soul of this town. Its outskirts were filled with vast corrals teeming with horses and cattle, providing valuable resources not only for the local residents but also for the distant territories. The desert trail stretching from Drake Ranch into the vast prairies, full of dangers and unpredictability, remained the town's only lifeline and connection to the outside world in these wild lands. The locals knew well the treachery of the open road, where eternal sandstorms hindered visibility, and encounters with bandits or wild animals were a common occurrence. However, neither fear nor difficulties could break the spirit of the townspeople in their pursuit of prosperity and survival. The little house at the beginning of the street belonged to the family of the respected sheriff, who was renowned for his fiery temperament, always quick to reach for his revolver at the slightest conflict. Such methods didn't always yield the desired effect, especially with criminals who were also adept at handling weapons. A notable example of failed diplomacy was the incident at the local brothel. The sheriff was informed about two visitors who adamantly refused to surrender their weapons upon entering the establishment, but also had no intention of leaving unsatisfied. There was a good chance that the conflict could have been avoided, as the Brad and Joe brothers had simply come to relax and unwind. However, instead of that, the lawman decided to flex his muscles and resort to threats. The boys were not of timid stock, and if they weren't going to be heard peacefully, they quickly decided to make their point forcefully. In the midst of the ensuing shootout, amidst shattering glass and the screams of ladies, a stray bullet found its mark, hitting one of the brothers in the temple, and Evan, without realizing it, had just set the countdown in motion. Of course, he knew that the profession of maintaining law and order could be dangerous for himself and his loved ones, but he never expected that this particular confrontation would turn into a catastrophe for him. Little did he know that he had taken the younger brother away from the leader of the gang that had been plaguing the town. Outside, the sound of hooves could be heard. Reinforcements were rushing in response to the gunshots. Realizing that he couldn't handle this alone, the elder brother, Joe, leaped over the shards of the broken window, skillfully mounted his horse, and rode away. Watching him go, Evan understood it wasn't over yet. Now, with the leader of the gang knowing the face of his brother's killer, trouble was only a matter of time. And as soon as Drake distanced himself from the incident, fate presented him with a lesson. The bandits managed to track down the sheriff's kin, and in broad daylight, the scoundrels brazenly invaded his home. The absence of Evan didn't deter them, as they came to take something more valuable than his life. When the weary lawman finally returned home, he was greeted by nothing but an eerie silence and a concise note: Memento mori, remember death. The loss of his wife and daughter was more than a blow. It poisoned his soul. Now he lived in solitude, relentlessly fighting against crime, vowing to himself not to stop until he avenged those who took his family. The only problem was that the sheriff didn't know the faces of those he was seeking. The killers had caused plenty of grief, but they didn't stop there. Joe handed one of his men a note, supposedly from a wandering doctor, instructing him to hang it on the bulletin board. It was a place where all sorts of nonsense often hung, but as intended, the elegant note adorned with ornamentation caught the sheriff's attention, as it was a rare occurrence in these parts. The paper pleaded for help from the wandering Dr. Samuel White. He needed a brave assistant to venture into the forbidden lands west of the trail. There were rumors of a mysterious town where boundless chaos reigned. Fierce Indian tribes idolized this town, considering it a sacred place, while white settlers feared its tales of dark forces that dwelled within. Dr. White hoped to find answers to his questions about the enigmatic town and warned Evan of the inevitable dangers, resurrecting his thirst for vengeance once more. Evan agreed and embarked on a perilous journey with the doctor. They traversed the desert plains, gathering shards of the past, abandoned campfires, gutted remains, and warning inscriptions on rocks. Surrounded by dark hills and shrouded in thick clouds, the outskirts of Moorville immediately signaled that one should always stay on high alert in this corner of the land, as the atmosphere of danger and despair was palpable to the naked eye. When the travelers finally reached the heart of the town, they were met with horror that exceeded all expectations. The streets were deserted, and the buildings seemed ready to collapse at any moment. An ominous presence lingered in the air, adding to the nightmare. In search of answers, Evan and Dr. White ventured deeper into the city, sinking further into the darkness. The streets of Moorville were shrouded in emptiness and sinister shadows. Semi-ruined buildings and decaying trees stared at Evan like living creatures, emitting malevolent laughter. Some townsfolk hid in shelters, afraid to venture outside even during the day. As Evan and Samuel explored the town, they witnessed brutal crimes committed in the name of violence and power. Bands of sadistic bandits ruled the streets, where cruelty was the only law. It seemed as if evil itself fed off the city's energy, devouring any sparks of goodness and humanity. From the tales of the locals, they learned horrifying details. Those whom the bandits didn't immediately dispose of were taken away and later seen roaming the streets once again. Each of these lucky ones underwent a significant change in behavior. Muttering about a certain doctor, they had all fallen victim to inhumane experiments conducted by a mysterious madman who sought immortality and control over an unknown force lurking within the depths of the city. The otherworldly delusions had twisted his mind, gradually stripping away his humanity, and he had come to envision himself as an invincible reaper. The town was plagued, and desperate to overcome the epidemic through conventional means, the doctor resorted to a slippery path, replacing one menace with another. The experiments yielded no tangible results and often brought chaos and destruction. Yet, for the deranged doctor, such outcomes only amused and emboldened him, driving him to even more gruesome experiments. Meanwhile, the puzzle pieces in the sheriff's mind began to form a complete picture. But fate had yet another cruel twist in store. In the depths of the dark and silent city, an ambush awaited. Driven by an insatiable hunger for prey, a ruthless gang surrounded the travelers with cries and laughter. Evan knew diplomacy wouldn't suffice, so he swiftly drew his revolver and initiated a shootout. Firing off a few shots at random, the sheriff took up a position favorable for a counterattack. The situation demanded swift decisions from both members of the team, and Samuel surprised Drake with his agility and resourcefulness, quickly positioning himself at a corner of a house on the opposite side of the street while the sheriff diverted attention towards himself. Not bad at all for a doctor, Evan thought. Pressed against the wall, he fought desperately, mowing down scum one after another, but the numerical advantage was on their side. Amidst the cries, gunshots, and whistling bullets, Drake heard his comrades scream. Slightly stepping away from the corner of the house, he checked Samuel's position, but it was already too late. Several bandits were dragging him deeper into the street. Evan, unable to save his partner and risking injuring him further, aimed to take a few shots at the abductors, but to his dismay, he only heard a dry click. Precious seconds were wasted, and the chances of rescuing the captive dwindled. Anger and despair engulfed him, and reloading his weapon, he began searching for the next target. Without visual contact, the lawman decided to take matters into his own hands. Storming the enemy without knowing their numbers or positions was suicidal. But in a foreign town, there might not be another chance to save a friend. Gathering his resolve, Evan burst out of his hiding spot, showering potential enemy positions with lead, but to his surprise, he didn't hear any return fire. Only those who had already fallen by his hand remained around him. And now Evan stood alone. Once again, the ghosts of the past once again tore through his consciousness, awakening a bitter sense of guilt. Once again, he couldn't help those who needed him. Once again, he was too late. This time, he had to make things right. He couldn't afford to lose the last person who cared about him. Not again. In his attempt to find his partner, the sheriff delved into the depths of immorality, becoming one of those he had once fought against. His perception of the world warped, as it seemed the townsfolk, whom he tried to question about the ruling gang, were lying to him for various reasons or hiding something. Frustration at the people's inability to understand that Drake wanted to help them too fueled a monstrous rage within him, leaving less room in the sheriff's heart for mercy and compassion. After days of stagnation, Evan changed his interrogation methods. It was no longer mere pleas for assistance. He would literally burst into people's homes and forcibly extract information from them, using force to persuade anyone who disagreed. This strategy yielded much greater results for Evan. But if he didn't like the response from the homeowners or encountered fierce resistance, in such cases, Evan the law equated them to criminals and executed them on the spot, leaving a bloody trail in the course of his investigation. He differed little from those he hunted, leaving families without fathers and husbands, and sometimes snuffing out the lives of entire families. Having lost the last shred of his humanity, he became a symbol of horror and death in the very city he had come to save. He killed indiscriminately, mercilessly, and with a mad sense of pleasure. Each execution was steeped in darkness and evil, seeping into the essence of his being. Morville became a place of nightmares, where shadows hid from the sun itself, and the townspeople, consumed by despair, hid in the darkest corners of their homes, knowing that each new day would bring even more horror and suffering into their lives. With each subsequent interrogation and each new victim, Evan felt his soul sink deeper into the abyss of darkness. But he could no longer stop. Revenge had consumed his essence, and he had become inconceivable without it. But despite the path he had taken, deep within his soul, the struggle between darkness and light continued to torment him. Whatever he did, no matter how many he sent to the ancestors, it was still not enough to drown out the pain and suffering. That was the case until Evan, in search of answers, arrived at an old church, where he encountered a mysterious figure. The stranger stood out greatly from the previous interrogated individuals, both in appearance and behavior. Their conversation flowed smoothly and calmly, as if they had known each other for a very long time. The figure not only provided the location of the mad doctor and his gang with sweet words, but also advised on how to preserve oneself in the process. The speech style and warnings about not succumbing to emotions and turning a blind eye to the possible consequences seemed slightly peculiar to Evan. Nonetheless, after obtaining the necessary information, the man disregarded everything else, completely forgetting that he was once a hero. He also forgot that everything in the world is interconnected and that actions have consequences. Good begets good, and evil begets even greater evil. And our hero was no exception. The endless carousel of cruel retribution returned as a boomerang to the overexcited mind, clouding his sanity, one of which became decisive for him. The Avenger woke up bound to a vertical grid in what clearly seemed like a basement room. He was cursed and forgotten by everyone. There was no one left who knew who he once was. Consumed by pain and suffering, in the far corner across from him, Evan caught sight of the one he had longed to meet. Flickering candlelights softly illuminated the room, revealing a dark figure with a mask and a long bird-like nose. From that moment on, The former sheriff didn't even hope to leave the room alive. Meanwhile, the stranger approached, clearly relishing the moment. Coming within arm's reach, the doctor removed the mask, and what the sheriff saw left him in shock. Samuel White was hiding beneath the mask. Evan couldn't believe his eyes, but the facts spoke for themselves. All this time, the one he had been searching for was right beside him. "I've come for you, Evan Drake. You can't imagine how long I've been waiting for this. It's time to settle the score," Sam said softly, with feigned remorse. Memento mori, on the edge of his own insane agony. Evan met death brought upon by his own hands. He was consumed by the abyss of darkness, where his soul drowned without the possibility of salvation, and his name would only remain a memory of the darkest town where humanity lost itself.